Hi, everyone who's joining. You're all very welcome here today. We're going to get going in a couple of minutes. I'm just waiting for you all to join us here on Zoom. You're all very welcome. Hi, everyone. While we're waiting to get going, please do say hi in the chat panel. We always like to hear who you are, your union, where you are in the country. And later on in the session, if you want to exchange ideas and advice, please do so. Great to see a couple of you already there. And now there's hundreds of you joining, which is great to see. I'm just going to give it about a minute more, just so we get as many people as possible in. Okay, I will get going with some webinar introductions just while other people are joining us. So hi everyone, I'm Anna from the TUC. I'm joined by Susan from Alcohol Change UK, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that organisation in a minute. Just the usual webinar housekeeping first of all. Great to see so many of you already saying hello in the chat panel. We like to hear your union, where you are in the country, your workplace, if you would like to share that as well. We always like to hear about what's going on in your workplaces. We are, of course, recording today's webinar, as we usually do. So if you miss anything or you've got to leave early, don't worry. We will send you a link to the recording along with any resources that we think will be helpful to you from us at the TUC or from Susan and her colleagues. If you want to follow along with live captions, you can click the show captions button, which is at the bottom of the screen, and then you can follow along with that. And we also have saved some time today for some questions to put to Susan. So if you've got a question, please post it in the Q&A panel. Again, it's at the bottom of the screen. It looks like a speech bubble with a question mark in it. So we'll get to those after some questions that I've got for Susan, first of all. Right, okay, that's the housekeeping out of the way. We're going to be talking today about the issue of alcohol in the workplace. And before we get into the detail, we just wanted to recognise that this can be quite a difficult subject for people, either in regard to their own experience, a family member, a friend, a loved one. It can really hit deep. So we just wanted to offer this warning at the start that it might be some issues that come up that you find difficult. And I think Susan will be talking a little bit more about that as we get further into the webinar. So Susan, you're very welcome. Before I put my first question to you, can you just tell us a little bit about your organisation, Alcohol Change, and you and what you do there?
Thanks, Anna, and hello everyone. Thanks for inviting me here. Yeah, I work for Alcohol Change UK, who are I think the UK alcohol charity. The important thing about us is that we're not anti-alcohol, and I'm actually their lived experience person, their expert by experience. And what Alcohol Change UK is all about is reducing the harms of alcohol, not they're not striving towards, getting rid of alcohol. It's a massive part of our culture, as we all know. And part of the work we do is in the workplace because we know that there's this link between the workplace and alcohol and the workplace. So that it's just part of what we do to reduce the harms of alcohol. We do a lot of research. We work with MPs to look at things like minimum unit pricing and a lot of training as well.
That's great, Susan. Sounds really interesting, and I'm sure we'll hear more about this work as we go along. So the first question, which I think will really help us set the scene, is why is this an issue for workplace reps? What's the link between alcohol and work?
Yeah, well, alcohol and work can have this sort of mutually negative impact, this sort of cause and effect on each other. A lot of us spend a lot of time at work, and with that, sometimes come a lot of stresses and anxieties about, jobs and deadlines and things like that. But we know from work that we've done that about 2/3 of employees will blame workplace stress, workplace worries for impacting on their drinking. That's some very recent work we've done, but there's been work done in the past by YouGov as well, showing that link. But the alcohol, like I say, there's this sort of mutually negative impact. People drink for all sorts of reasons. People drink to socialize, and all kinds of reasons. Like I said at the beginning, it's a big part of our culture. And even moderate drinking can have an impact on things like our sleep, our concentration. So our own drinking can impact on our performance the next day in the workplace. But the big impact is that we're focusing on in Alcohol Awareness Week is the other way around: workplace stress impacting on people's drinking, because alcohol, because it's readily available, it's legal. It's been called the UK's biggest, most popular coping mechanism, because in the very short term, it can help us, just de-stress. So people do turn to alcohol, but that has this knock-on effect. And we know that, I mean, obviously there are things like impacting on people in terms of reaction times if they're, using machinery and stuff. But the big impact that alcohol has on the workplace, over 80% of the problems caused in the workplace by alcohol are around hangovers and people being tired and colleagues picking up the slack for them. And then the final sort of relationship between alcohol and the workplace is the culture in different workplaces. Often alcohol really is center stage when it comes to workplace socializing, from sales meetings to conferences to just, meeting down the pub after work to network. And for some people, there's a lot of pressure to get involved in that. People sometimes don't want to miss out. But we know that, people don't drink for all sorts of reasons, not just people with a problem with alcohol, but, maybe medical reasons. So we know that sometimes valued employees might be avoiding workplace socials because there'll be alcohol there. So there are all sorts of little strands where alcohol and work, are linked to each other.
Thanks for that really sort of comprehensive intro to the area, Susan. And I think there's so many things you said there that are going to be important for workplace reps. Reps often, as we all know, get involved with disciplinary issues or performance issues at work, sick leave, all sorts of things. So these are lots of things they need to be aware of that could be related to all the issues you've just mentioned. But another area, of course, where reps can make a difference is about workplace policies. And the policy obviously is negotiated with management. It's then what everyone abides by, and so everyone knows where they stand. So I wanted to know next, what does a good workplace alcohol policy look like?
Well, first of all, not all organizations have an alcohol policy in place. So I would say, first of all, it is, really important that we have one. But the focus should very much be on well-being. It should be about prevention and not punishment, not waiting until things are a disciplinary issue. It should be all about making people feeling comfortable and supported, and encouraging people to get help early. And I think as somebody with lived experience, what people might not realize is that, alcohol, if you are drinking and you're worried about your drinking, the workplace can be a really scary place to open up about it. There's a lot of fear. Will I be disciplined if I open up? Am I then have I blotted my copybook? Are people going to be watching me and stuff? So there's a lot of fear. So if a policy is all about, prevention and supporting people and encouraging people to come forward to help, that could really help a lot of people not progress to where then becomes a crisis or a disciplinary issue, or having accidents, or impacting on work, or taking time off sick. So a good workplace policy should very much be about well-being. Obviously, all the other things you'd expect in there, like, on confidentiality, things like that. But, stuff like, if somebody does need help, does need support, allowing them time to get that help in the same way that we do with other things, allowing somebody time to take to maybe get counseling, or whatever route they need to go down. So acknowledging that as well, like I say, rather than waiting for something to become a real issue. And I always say to organizations, you might have a really, really valued member of staff who, for this moment in time, is going through a bit of a tough time and might have turned to alcohol. And if they know that they can talk about that, that the culture, the policy encourages that, you can prevent them from that progressing, from them keeping it to themselves, because alcohol and alcohol problems do progress if we don't address them. So you could really help somebody, deal with that moment in time and get them back to their best version of themselves, and the best employee, and the person that they were.
Thanks, Susan. I'm just going to follow up on something that came up in the chat while you were speaking about you were talking about fostering a culture of someone feeling supported, that they're perhaps destigmatized. What would the relationship be here with occupational health? Would that be part of the policy as well, or is that a separate avenue?
I, I think a good policy should really involve anyone that can support that person. So absolutely, I think a good policy should be really comprehensive, and should really set out exactly, be very clear. The other thing that we know from the work that we do at Alcohol Change UK is that, like I say, often there isn't an alcohol policy, but sometimes where they do exist, they're quite vague. So I think absolutely, include the different teams that you need to include, because alcohol, it can be quite it can impact on different people in different ways. So the more support, the more help we can give them, the better. And Alcohol Change UK, as part of the work we do, we can help organizations create those alcohol policies in line with what is best for that organization.
Thanks, Susan. And we will post the link to Alcohol Change UK in the chat so that you can take a look at the resources on their website. And we'll, of course, include that in the links we send out to you. It'll be tomorrow morning. You get a link to the recording and any resources. So you mentioned in your introduction, Susan, about that workplace culture is often quite focused on alcohol, and that's not always appropriate or easy. So what advice have you got for how workplaces can create a more inclusive culture that supports those who don't necessarily want to drink?
Yeah, this is so important, because sometimes I think, especially in our country, there is this assumption that people like events that where alcohol is a big part of it, a free bar or whatever. But we shouldn't assume that everyone drinks alcohol. As I said at the beginning, there are all sorts of reasons why people may not want to drink. And it isn't just people like me who have an issue, an alcohol problem. There are medical reasons, there are cultural reasons. So don't, first of all, assume that everyone wants to drink alcohol. And as I said before, we know that some people avoid workplace socials if there's going to be alcohol there. So an organization could inadvertently be making somebody choose between socializing with their colleagues and missing out completely. But the sort of things they can do to be inclusive is, first of all, to think outside the box sometimes. There are lots of events we can organize that on don't revolve around alcohol. We've got advice on the website, but there's lots of things, like even from volunteering to escape rooms to, it doesn't always have to involve alcohol. Things that we can do to build that camaraderie, team building events that aren't around alcohol. So I would think about that. If alcohol is going to be part of something, maybe an award ceremony or something like that, I would very much say, maybe having a free bar all night isn't a good idea, because that again, it sort of sends out that signal that, we're just expecting people to drink all night. So maybe have a sort of voucher system where people can get a couple of drinks. And also, and I know from experience how difficult this can sometimes be. Look at what you're offering to people who don't drink alcohol, because long gone are the days when it's all about orange juice or sparkling water. There are so many delicious alcohol-free alternatives out there, and I know from the work we do with different partners who create alcohol-free drinks. Gone are the days again where alcohol-free wine, alcohol-free beer doesn't taste very nice. There are delicious alcohol-free drinks out there, mocktails. So making it, the event just as enjoyable for people who aren't drinking by, putting a bit of thought into alcohol-free versions of things. But the whole culture thing around drinking, it really does have to come from the top down as well, leading by example. If every time we organize a workplace event and there's a free bar and, leaders are indulging in that, it just sends out a signal. But we can send out another powerful signal that we're inclusive and everyone is valued and everyone matters, and we're catering for everyone as well.
Absolutely, Susan. And a couple of people raised in the chat that uh, in some workplaces, perhaps there's a perception that if you're not going to the social events in the pub, that you're not seen as part of the team, you're not bonding with them, you're not,
Yeah.
getting that camaraderie, I guess, for want of a better word. And so all the suggestions you've just made, I think, really sort of help with that. You can build teams in lots of different ways, can't you? You gave some, escape rooms or volunteering or maybe sports or something. There's lots of things that we can do instead.
Yeah, and I, I I think it can't be overstated just how under pressure some people can feel to drink. I know in the industry I was in years ago, there was very much an emphasis, especially because there was a lot of entertaining. There was, sales meetings and conferences, and I can remember when I realized I was struggling with alcohol, there'd be periods of time when I was trying not to drink, and it's sort of, why aren't you drinking? You always drink. Go and have it. We call it sober shaming now, but there can be a lot of pressure put on people, that makes it so difficult. And often, the people encouraging other people to drink and wanting people to drink, that says more about them. It's because they don't want to feel bad about the fact that they're drinking a lot. So there can be a lot of pressure put on people. And what we say is that absolutely shouldn't be a situation like that. It's about, these days, things are about inclusivity and acknowledging that it's not just because somebody might have an issue with alcohol. There could be all sorts of reasons why somebody just doesn't want to drink or is cutting down.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, I think that's important. There can be hundreds, thousands of reasons why we shouldn't assume. At the same time as this making something more inclusive. Um, okay, the next question is about working from home and how that can affect someone's drinking. Now, working from home is something that a lot of us, I admit not all, but a lot of us have done a lot more over the past 5 years since COVID became, well,
Yeah.
an illness. So we're all doing it more, if our job allows it. So what do we need to think about when working from home and alcohol?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's brought with it its own problems in terms of alcohol. Obviously, it's people are far more flexible now, and people benefit from it. But working from home brings issues like isolation as well. The line between finishing work and starting the evening can be quite blurred. It can get earlier in the day. Some people use a drink to sort of signify, right, I've finished work and I'm relaxing now for the evening. So those lines can very much be blurred. And you're right about, lockdown. Things did change then, and even though it's quite a while ago now, there was a whole group of people who would never have dreamed of sitting drinking at home, but because pubs were shut and restaurants were shut, some people, started drinking at home, which people had to. And for some people, that habit stayed with them. So some people are drinking, maybe more than they did, or drinking more at home. So we've got all of those issues. But we've also got the issue of, if somebody isn't having to get up for the commute, they can maybe drink more. They can sit up later drinking, and they're not having to worry about, how long alcohol is staying in their body, because they don't have to drive or whatever. They can have more of a lie-in because I haven't got that commute. So that makes it easier, and I always say to people, it's so easy without doing it deliberately and without even realizing it, how this can creep up on us. And working from home, like I say, blurring those lines, having maybe later nights and lie-ins has just made that, easier for people. And it's worth just having that awareness about that things have changed. And yeah, working from home is a big one. And it makes it trickier for line managers and colleagues to know if there's somebody's maybe having a bit of a tough time and maybe using alcohol.
Yeah, of course. When someone's not physically in your presence every day or even every week, these things can definitely maybe go under the
Yeah.
radar a bit more, can't they? I think the isolation of a few people have mentioned in the chat is a big deal. Prior to the pandemic, lots of people had never worked from home on a regular basis. So it was, I think, quite a shock. It was quite a change in lifestyle. So it was, I appreciate then we went from, it was an all to nothing, wasn't it? And now we've got a more hybrid system. But yeah, I think that's something that maybe reps can be a bit aware of.
Mhm.
It's not always like physically in the workplace. Of course, work happens in other places too. So that leads me on to my next question. What what are the signs that someone might be struggling with alcohol? Like what should a rep look out for? And then if they spot something, what should they do?
Yeah. It it can be really tricky, first of all, because if somebody is struggling with alcohol, first of all, as I've alluded to, there's a lot of fear around that. So people, try to try to hide things. There's so much stigma around alcohol and fear of judgment. So it can be tricky, but in terms of like the behavior of somebody physically going to work, I would say, it might be about absenteeism, maybe, especially Mondays. And like I said before, hangovers, the one of the hidden costs of alcohol to the economy. But yeah, frequent or more frequent absences, absolutely. But somebody's demeanor, maybe being more irritable, and a change in behavior. Because often if somebody is hungover, you can feel quite irritable with it, but people behaving differently as well. People who encourage other people to drink, like I said, so because that can be a smokescreen to detract from somebody's drinking, and concerns expressed by colleagues. Sometimes colleagues are picking up slack with things, or can smell alcohol or whatever. With remote working, it's more difficult, as you've said. Um, maybe things like somebody keeping their camera off more than they used to. You know, hiding behind just their initials on the screen. Again, demeanor, missing meetings, maybe. Um, but in terms of what we can do, and this goes back to what I was saying about the policy as well, but what we can do as people, we're not talking about, you know, giving medical advice or judging people. We're talking about listening and supporting. It's all about supporting somebody. There's a lot, there's a lot of fear, there's a lot of stigma. And this isn't me sort of making excuses. This is to help somebody in the best way possible. It's about being supportive and listening and knowing, being really confident about signposting as well, knowing what resources are available, knowing what is in an organization's policy around alcohol. So having that information, being confident about signposting, you know, but just offering non-judgmental support, confidential support, but also, you know, knowing what is in the policy and what we can and what we should be, you know, maybe taking further. But for me, it's about listening and supporting and prevention, you know, prevention. If somebody knows that they're being supported and they're not going to be disciplined, it can make absolutely all the difference. And if we've got confident reps who have the information to hand, understand about, you know, that if these problems, these issues with alcohol can be totally temporary. Like I said, it could just be somebody going through a tough period of time at that moment in time. It doesn't necessarily mean this person is going to be alcohol dependent and it's, you know, this is going to progress. It can make all the difference just to have that confidence to listen and support and to signpost somebody. And, you know, maybe offer to accompany them to things as well. So that's the important thing. But it can be, yeah, it can be very tricky. People, because of the fear that they feel, can be very defensive and things. But it's just that if they feel supported rather than judged or worried about being disciplined, that makes all the difference.
Thanks, Susan. And hopefully, that in your role as reps, you know, our viewers, this is something that you've experienced before, not necessarily related to alcohol. In as a rep, we often have members come to us with a whole range of issues, a whole range of problems, workplace, outside the workplace. We're all hopefully good listeners, and we know how to, you know, listen to someone's story, be there for them, and signpost them. So
Yeah,
I'm you know, wary of you all thinking that you're suddenly going to become like counselors. You're not, but we as reps, you know, we listen and we understand and we support members as well. um Before I ask the next question to you, Susan, one of the viewers posted in the chat about 5 minutes ago, and I want to put this question to the audience because I'm curious. They asked how many cases have us reps here watching, dealt with that were likely linked to alcohol, and so that personal cases like representing a colleague. Just put, okay, someone's put 0. Okay, here we go. Their numbers are going to start sort of speeding by. Um, so we've got small numbers at the moment, but then some quite a bit higher, and the frequency is um, is quite a lot as well. So related to that, were you aware that the alcohol link was something? Were you aware of that link from the beginning of your representation, or was it something that came out down the line? Down the line. Okay, so these answers might start coming in as well. So this is really interesting, just so that we can find out what's happening as well. I think we've got a mixture of a couple of people saying they knew at the beginning, but most people saying that they found out down the line while they were into the process, because like you're all saying, or like many of you are saying, people don't often want to admit this at the beginning. Um, it comes out a bit later. So thanks for that. That's really interesting. That's really helpful to us as well, because it really helps us to understand what's going on at workplaces, at the workplace level, and what reps are dealing with. Right. So
Could
go
I
on.
just add
Yeah,
something
go
to
for
that?
it. Go for it.
Because, when we're talking about supporting somebody and helping them, uh, so we've and it's clear from what people are saying, it is about that confidence in signposting, to whether it be to the NHS, or like you mentioned before, occupational health, or there might be an employee assistance program, things like that. But I think that is the key: being confident, knowing where to signpost to, and having those knowing that, because it's so important for somebody like me to stress, we're not expecting people to be medical professionals or to give advice, because with alcohol, and sometimes, you ask somebody how much they're drinking, and maybe they underplay it a bit. We could never advise somebody about their drinking, because there's a risk of withdrawals and things like that. So it's about confidence in knowing to signpost somebody, rather than trying to think, how do I help this person and advise them about their drinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've talked a lot about signposting, and we have posted the link to the Alcohol Change website. What are some of the other places that reps can signpost to?
There are other charities as well, and that's a really good point, because some of the issues in the workplace with alcohol aren't down to the actual employee. Their work might be suffering because they're concerned about a family member or a significant other or a loved one, and that might be impacting. I mean, it really can impact on somebody's mental health. So there are charities like AdFam who help family members. So knowing about that sort of support as well. But absolutely, local alcohol treatment support services, the NHS, GPs are brilliant, a first port of call, occupational health services, like you mentioned. So there's lots of organizations, and we've got details of things on our website. But yeah, it's knowing what's available, and like I said, sometimes somebody's suffering at work because they're worried about somebody at home, and it's really impacting on them. It can be impacting on their finances or their mental health and stuff. So there are organizations to support them as well.
I think that's a really important point you made just there. It's not always the employee, the member that you're working with. It could be, their family.
Yeah.
The stress and the worry from that can have a big impact. I'm sure a lot of our audience will have maybe dealt with people who are worried about a family member, about this issue or another. Impact is wide, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, so what can you tell us a bit about what some of the common myths are around alcohol, especially in relation to work, please?
I think, yeah, there's a lot. I think a really important thing, that I come across in the talks I give, is people, first of all, just not even being aware of things like what an actual unit is, what the guidelines are, and how long it takes your body to process alcohol. And because of that, people not being aware of that, that is where the myths come around about how much you can have, and then how long and you can drive. I've even had professionals say to me, isn't it, 2 glasses of wine, isn't it this, that? Whereas in reality, because everyone is different at processing alcohol, and it depends on, it's not old wives' tales, it depends on people's size and weight and whether they've eaten, that cannot be translated into safely into units, because we couldn't say for everyone X amount of units is safe, because everyone's processing time of alcohol is different. So people are unaware of things like that. which can really impact on people. And people believe what they're told by, when you're drinking, you often, gravitate towards people who drink like you, and you believe what they say. And so, and it normalizes things. But the other big ones, myths, alcohol helps you sleep, where the opposite is the case. Sleep, it can knock you out, but sleep brought on by alcohol is a very fitful sleep, a very poor quality sleep. So it actually has the opposite effect. You wake up more tired, and then, but people do use alcohol on an evening to help them sleep. And the opposite is true. So, and that's going to impact on you the next day. You're going to be tired. So it's this vicious cycle. And the really big one for me, and this was something I had no idea about, was that alcohol, does help you cope with things like anxieties at work. I I honestly thought that that there was something wrong in my life, in my job, that was making me anxious. And I wasn't aware that it was the alcohol that I was drinking, and, the impact that that has on your brain, that was causing the anxiety. So in the end, I was drinking alcohol to take away anxiety caused by alcohol. And we just have to think of the words people use for, even the slightest, the mildest hangover, like the fear, anxiety, beer fear, boozanoia, stuff like that, all alluding to being anxious or being fearful or being paranoid. And that is because what alcohol is doing to our brains. So over time, if we're using alcohol to help relieve these things, we can easily get into this nasty cycle. So I would say sleep and helping cope with stress and things like that are big myths. Other myths, things like wine is fine, wine is less damaging or dangerous or risky than spirits. Once alcohol's in the body, alcohol is alcohol. It's all processed the same. So one drink isn't, less bad for you. And in this, along the same vein, sorry, if anyone does read these things, it said, a couple of glasses of red wine is good for your heart, because we know now that alcohol is a carcinogen. Those messages aren't messages given out anymore, because, alcohol is harmful to the body. But I want to stress here, we aren't anti-alcohol. It's just about being aware and having a healthy respect for it. And being aware of these myths, especially if you can't sleep, alcohol isn't going to help. It's going to make you more tired. And like I say, it works at knocking you out, but you're going to be more tired. So yeah, lots of myths, lots of misinformation about alcohol.
Thanks, thanks, Susan. There's some really interesting points there that I think people were responding to in the chat as well. Right, I've got one more question that you know I pre-prepared before we're going to take some of the ones that have come up from the audience. So we talked a lot earlier about socializing at work or after work. What are your tips for socializing at work where alcohol is involved if you don't want to drink?
If you don't want to drink, yeah. For me, it's about being prepared. Um, and I know I was very guilty of the times when I was trying not to drink, just sort of not going into things with the right mindset or being prepared. So be prepared for the event. Don't just let it happen to you. So get into the right mindset first. This isn't a punishment. You'll have reasons why maybe you don't want to drink, or you're not drinking, or whatever. So get into the right mindset. But always have the first rule I give people, apart from being in the right mindset, have an answer ready to the question, why aren't you drinking? Because that was where I would, sort of stumble at the first hurdle. Why aren't you drinking, Sue? You always have a drink. Why? So have an answer, because people will ask if you usually, drink with them. And even if it's a little white lie, it's nobody's business anyway, but have an answer prepared, because it saves you being put on the spot and not having an answer. So have an answer ready for that question, why aren't you drinking? I would suggest having a wingman as well, like somebody trust that you can confide in, who will support you. If you're particularly concerned, there's going to be a lot of pressure here to drink, somebody that will support you and have you back if they see you being put under pressure. So have that as well. Check the drinks menu in advance. Again, and I'm guilty of this, going somewhere and somebody says, what do you want to drink? And I'm on autopilot, oh, I'll have a glass of wine. Know what the alcohol-free options are in advance, whether, if it's an event you're going to, so you know what you're going to order. It sounds really basic, but sometimes people stumble when they put on the spot and then they just autopilot to an alcohol order. And if all else fails, have an exit strategy as well. If it be, again, in the same way as being prepared with your answer to the question, why aren't you drinking? Have an excuse to leave prepared in advance, just in case. And that can be a little white lie as well, because, sometimes people do feel under pressure and it might be so important to them not to be drinking. And that's where I would, really stress again, we shouldn't pressure people to drink because we have no idea why they might be trying not to drink. But it does happen. And I wouldn't be at all, if I'm invited somewhere that I don't know what this is, maybe a big alcohol-free bar or whatever. Don't be shy about taking your own drink as well, or somebody's house, or people won't be insulted if you're worried about that there's just going to be alcohol there.
Thanks, Susan. That really, really great information there. I think for reps, either if they're supporting someone individually or at the workplace level where we're negotiating a policy, I suspect, maybe I'm wrong, but I suspect that a lot of workplaces perhaps don't have a policy on alcohol. So your point about getting one introduced, I think, is really important. Actually, if you've got a workplace policy on alcohol, tell us in the chat. I'm quite curious as well. I suspect. Oh, people are saying yes. That's really interesting. I'm going to be proved wrong. Okay, happy to be proved wrong. Right. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions that have come up from our audience. We've had quite a few questions raised about testing, like random workplace testing for alcohol and other substances, drugs. And one thing I think I will add here is the page on the TUC website that is most visited is the one about testing, alcohol testing and drug testing at work. So we've had quite a lot of comments about this as well. So I'm wondering whether you could just talk a bit in general about this issue and
Yeah.
the role of workplace reps in this.
Yeah, and obviously, in safety critical environments, where machinery and people are driving, reps like I was in my car all the time. Obviously, lots of workplaces have random testing in place, and that is often, part of the policy, as it should be. With the things that I'm talking about from my lived experience, about support and stuff, are really, really important. But I also appreciate, and we appreciate, we have to keep people safe as well, keep the person safe, keep colleagues safe. So lots of organizations have testing as part of their policy, and rightly so. But what I would add into that are some of the the misinformation that people have about how long alcohol stays in their system, for example. I think one of the really key things is education about alcohol, and that is something in the work that I do that I realize is often really lacking. Even if there is a testing policy, often people will think, well, it's so many hours since I had that drink, I'll be okay. And they don't realize that, actually, no, it takes and just because you were drinking weak lager, it doesn't mean that it's safer than drinking X drink. There's often not the education around alcohol units, alcohol processing time, and people workplaces need to be, helping employees with that. This work that we've done recently, this research about alcohol and work, something really a figure that was much higher than I thought would be, that over 80% of employees think that employers do have a role to play, a responsibility in things like educating people about alcohol. So it's so important not to assume that people even understand what happens to alcohol in the body and when it's safe to when it's all been eliminated from the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Following on from what you just said about the responsibility of an employer to provide guidance and education on this area. We've had a question that asks how can we as trade unions work better to encourage members in situations where they may have a problem with drinking, to get support to save their jobs, improve their health, etc., when they are adamant they don't want to. I would add there the employer as well as the trade union.
Yeah,
And quite a few people have posted in the chat their personal experience of maybe handling a case where it's linked to alcohol, and they're all saying it's very difficult to sort of persuade someone if they don't want to get help
I
to change
t-
things.
I can't I totally understand this as well. Because in the old days you would say somebody was in denial or whatever. And we know that is just a word that explains so many things that are going on, like fear and stuff and shame. But at the end of the day, we've got to balance everything with keeping people safe and other employees and the workplace as well. Because at the end of the day, people have a workplace to run, and we've talked about that ripple effect. That if people are tired and stuff, it's going to impact on their colleagues and on the workplace. But I think just so a lot of the reason why people won't admit they've got a problem is because they're scared of the consequences of that. So I think it's just driving home this message that we are supportive, we are here to help, and we know that this is probably just a temporary thing, rather than somebody believing that I'm going to be in real trouble here, or I'm going to lose my job, or that's me sort of labeled for the rest of my career as somebody with an alcohol problem. No, it's just having that new sort of more supportive culture. Alcohol is something that for a long time has never been part of workplace agendas. And it's a bit like, years and years ago, mental people didn't open up about their mental health if they were struggling. We want to get it to sort of that situation, people feeling safe and confident that they can talk about it, and they can go to an employee or a rep. So yeah, it's changing that culture, but I absolutely appreciate, that sometimes you can say anything you like, and if somebody doesn't want to accept that help, it seems like there's nothing you can do. But it's the fact that if we keep showing somebody that we're here to be supportive, we're not here to judge them or report them or get them into trouble, that makes all the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question we've had posted, it's not really a question, more of a statement that adds to what you've just said. That if someone is registered with a regulatory body as part of their job, they could, of course, lose that accreditation, depending on what has happened. I'm trying to think of examples here, but all sorts of jobs have a professional registration. And if that is put at risk, obviously it can change someone's entire working life, their entire career situation. So our viewer is saying, encouragement, encouraging people to talk,
Yeah.
reach out, well-being, and obviously losing your professional license would be huge, but hopefully by providing support, we can help prevent that.
Yeah, it's encouraging that conversation. It's, talking about alcohol in the workplace, having, talks about, just to educate people about units and stuff, sends out a message that actually we acknowledge that sometimes, people might be turning to alcohol to cope with stuff or whatever. So just opening up the conversation in the workplace about alcohol by having it as part of the well-being agenda, training line managers, reps, educating staff, looking at the policy, looking at the culture around drinking, even doing an anonymous cultural audit, what do you think about the way you're the drinking culture in your workplace or whatever? Just sending out a signal. We're an organization that it totally appreciates that, yeah, alcohol's there, it's a big part of our culture, but it can have a negative effect on people, so we're here to support you if it does.
Thanks, Susan. Can you also talk a little bit more about the link between mental health or periods of poorer mental health and alcohol, and what reps perhaps can do in those situations? Hopefully, our audience will already have seen some of the resources we've put out about mental health before. We've done several webinars on the subject. We've got courses and other training resources, but there is a link here, on another level. So what else
Yeah,
can we add?
so there is that link. There's further down, somebody like me who is alcohol dependent, often there's that co-occur, what's called co-occurring conditions, where there's a mental health impact as well because of the impact of the alcohol. But in the early days, absolutely, if somebody is already, say somebody's already feeling anxious or depressed, adding alcohol to that is only, it can exacerbate the symptoms. Alcohol, just by its very nature, is it acts as a depressant on our nervous system, so makes people feel, a bit rubbish. And then it's when it's leaving the body, that's when we get the anxiety, because your body's adjusted to it being in there, and the chemicals got, in my very layman's terms of understanding it. But that's why the next day we feel a bit anxious. If somebody keeps on drinking like that over a period of time, alcohol can actually cause those things, like it did. I had very severe anxiety, and then if somebody is on medication for whether it's depression or anxiety, sometimes alcohol can impact on that. So there's a very strong link, but it can't be understated, alcohol and mental health, and the fact that people often use alcohol thinking that it's going to help, where the opposite is true. So I think if reps are aware of that, if somebody's already got those things, anxiety, depression, and they start using alcohol, it's going to make it worse. But also drinking more, or drinking more than the guidelines over a period of time, that can also cause anxiety and depression. So it's linked both ways, and that's when people are in, at risk of that progressing, like it did for me, and going into where you really need it, you become dependent on it.
Thanks, Susan. We've obviously focused a lot on providing support, a listening ear, signposting, but we've had a viewer ask about if there's any responsibility to inform, and the example they're giving is the DVLA. Perhaps if someone works in, they have a driving job. I'm going to broaden that out a bit to someone who might work with machinery,
Yeah,
or I'm anything that might cause them to perhaps harm others in
yeah,
their work. Not just driving. I'm going to make broaden that out a bit.
yeah.
Yeah,
I
critical safety roles. That's a great phrase.
Critical
Someone says,
safety roles,
yeah. Thank
absolutely.
you, Ben, for putting that.
Yeah, we have a responsibility to keep other people safe as well, and the person. So yeah, there are going to be instances where, and some of the training that we do for frontline professionals, who work in all sorts of roles, who are coming into contact with people who, like dependent drinkers, people who work in housing or social service, they sometimes do have to report that, to get in touch with things like the DVLA if they know somebody's driving around in a car over the influence. We have a responsibility to keep other people safe as well. So yeah, absolutely. You wouldn't, there's a certain point to which, confidentiality then goes into, are people going to be potentially harmed, or, worse, because this person, we know that they're over the influence and they're driving or they're operating machinery.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We've had a question as well about drinks that like non-alcoholic drinks that imitate alcohol, and you mentioned this a bit earlier about like non-alcoholic beer or wine, for example, and that you say some of them can be a substitute. And this viewer is saying that they are 7.5 years sober, but they feel that in their early days of sobriety this would have been really difficult for them, and
Yeah,
because it does taste
yeah,
almost imperceptibly the same as the
yeah.
original. So what's sort of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, for me, I know, because I've been told that, things like alcohol-free wine, alcohol-free beer now can taste lovely. I can't drink them myself because I don't want to be reminded of what wine tastes like, what beer tastes like. So I'm in that position as well, even 10.5 years down the line. So they can be a godsend to some people who don't want to drink, but for some people, you wouldn't want to drink something that reminds you of alcohol. And in even not that long ago, there was hardly any, you would go somewhere and it's sparkling water. I was always drinking ginger beer or tonic water, but these days, again, I drink something on a special occasion, sparkling tea, which is changed my life, because at a wedding or whatever, when people have a champagne flute, this is like a very, very special fizzy drink, but it tastes nothing like prosecco or champagne. But it's sparkling tea, Copenhagen sparkling tea, and it tastes very special and it's fizzy. But there's other things like seedlip, which, lots of these distilled non-alcoholic drinks that you would put tonic in. So there are alternatives that aren't meant to taste like alcohol. And I've had to, discover them, because I'm in the same boat as you. I can't drink alcohol-free wine and beer.
Thanks, Susan. We've got through, I think, a lot here, a lot of questions, and a lot of incredibly useful and valuable information. So people are recommending the sparkling tea in the chat, so that's great. So thank you all for joining us. We have learned a lot today. Thank you so much to Susan for your openness and honesty, and for sharing all this information with us. I forgot to mention at the start that we are in Alcohol Awareness Week. Is it from Monday through to Sunday?
Yeah.
So do check out the Alcohol Change UK website for more information about that as well. I think we have one more webinar before we have a break for the summer, and it's next week. Do join us for that. And if some of you are coming to the TEC event on employment law on Tuesday in Manchester, I'll see you there. Do come and say hello. I'm looking forward to meeting some of you next week. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Bye bye for now.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.